It's human nature to want answers, and just like us alive today, our ancestors wanted the same. They wanted to know where the rain came from, what an earthquake is, how life started, how the earth was formed, and what the bright lights in the night sky really are. And they knew. If we take earthquakes alone, medieval Christians knew that they were punishments sent by God. Ancient Greeks knew that they are caused each time Atlas lost a war against Zeus. And the ancient Japanese knew that they are caused by the sudden movement of the giant catfish who carries the world upon its back. And despite these claims woefully contradicting each other and being completely incompatible, they were all actually correct. That is, if one accepts an argument from ignorance. To state it clearly, an argument from ignorance occurs when either a claim is asserted to be true because it hasn't yet been proven to be false, or when a claim is asserted to be false because it hasn't yet been proven to be true. For example, you can't prove that there isn't a mirror universe of our own, therefore there must be one out there somewhere. However, in a typical argument from ignorance for a god, the specific type that we're going to focus on for the rest of this video, a theist will propose a scenario that cannot, or currently cannot, be adequately explained by our current understanding, and they will then fill the gap with an assertion of their god. Hence, this argument is often referred to as the God of the Gaps argument. For example, we currently do not know how life started. Therefore, God created life. When put this simply, it might sound like such a terrible argument that nobody in their right mind would use it. In fact, it may even sound like I'm strawmanning the argument, but in context, and when combined with other fallacies, especially the black and white fallacy, it's actually really quite difficult to notice. To give you a better representation of the previous example but when in context, here is the same argument but when presented in a typical conversation. Despite our scientific advancements and collective knowledge, we still haven't been able to prove that life can spontaneously pop out of thin air, and so therefore, assuming that there wasn't a divine intervention is close-minded. I mean, you don't know for sure that a god wasn't involved, and so acting as if one wasn't is disingenuous. You should try and keep an open mind. Do you see what I mean? Unless blindingly obvious, it's not always easy to spot. Anyhow, without further ado, let's debunk the hell out of this ignorant argument, starting with its most critical flaws. Arguably the most critical flaw in arguments from ignorance is that they attempt to shift the burden of proof. When two parties are in discourse and one asserts a claim that the other disputes, the party who is asserting the claim has the burden of proof to substantiate it. However, in an argument from ignorance, the asserting party insists that the other party must prove their claim false, and in doing this they attempt to shift the burden of proof. To go back to our life from non-life example, the theist attempts to shift the burden of proof by insisting that unless the other party can prove how life started, they are justified in maintaining a belief that their god divinely intervened. To illustrate the absurdity of shifting the burden of proof, in 1952, Bertrand Russell explained that if he were to assert, without offering proof, that somewhere between the Earth and Mars orbits a teapot around the Sun, he would not expect anyone to believe him solely because his assertion couldn't be proven wrong. Russell recognised and emphasised that the inability or disinclination to disprove his celestial teapot doesn't make his claim valid, nor does it lend it any credence. The burden of proof is with him to substantiate his claim. Another major recurring flaw with arguments from ignorance is that they often commit a black and white fallacy. A black and white fallacy occurs when a party presents two choices as the only possibilities, when in fact additional options cannot be ruled out. And in the case of our life from non-life example, the theist asserts that either life emerged spontaneously from nothing, or that their specific god created life, without justifying why these two options are the only possibilities. In doing this, they are once again attempting to shift the burden of proof. It is the theist that is making the claim that only two options exist, and so once again it is the theist that has the burden of proof to substantiate this claim. It is not up to the disputing party to disprove their assertions or provide additional options. A third major flaw that many, but not all arguments from ignorance have, is that rather than relying upon universal ignorance, they actually rely upon the personal ignorance of the theist, and in doing this, they commit a personal incredulity fallacy. A great example of personal incredulity can be seen in the following clip of Bill O'Reilly.
Tide goes in, tide goes out. Never a miscommunication. You can't explain that.
Because O'Reilly didn't, or, let's be honest, probably still doesn't understand that the moon's gravity is responsible for the rise and fall of sea levels, he asserted that a god, his very specific god, must be involved. Worse still is that when told why the tides function the way they do, he responded as follows.
Okay, how'd the moon get there? How'd the moon get there? Look, you pinheads who attacked me for this, you guys are just desperate. How'd the moon get there? How'd the sun get there? How'd it get there? Can you explain that to me?
O'Reilly jumped from a personal incredulity fallacy to another personal incredulity fallacy to another personal incredulity fallacy. As a side note, if you want to see a fantastic YouTuber go to town on O'Reilly, then be sure to check out Potholer54's channel. He's genuinely my favourite YouTuber of all time, and his content is simply divine. I've put a link in the description. Anyhow, to recap, arguments from ignorance are flawed because they attempt to shift the burden of proof, most, but not all, commit a black and white fallacy, and many, but not all, commit a personal incredulity fallacy. Of course, there are many, many more flaws and objections to be had with arguments from ignorance. But likewise to all arguments, it only takes one premise being discounted for the entire conclusion to crumble apart. And in the case of all arguments from ignorance, it is particularly the shifting of the burden of proof that is this devastating flaw. From, you can't prove there's not a god, to, so you think the universe just exploded from nothing, to, and as we have used as an example throughout this video, you think that life came out of nothing and for no reason. The shifting of the burden of proof is the nail in the coffin for arguments from ignorance. Thanks for the view, and before I go, I'll leave you with this overwhelmingly powerful argument to consider. You can't prove that Rationality Rules won't have 100,000 subscribers by 2018. Therefore, Rationality Rules will have 100,000 subscribers by 2018. Man, when broke down to its logical form, arguments from ignorance really do border on the comical.